said, we are really in the age of the Anthropocene. We are in the age of a destabilized physical environment. And as we speak, Los Angeles is on fire across the city, and this isn't a fire of a few poor districts that the elites would normally ignore. This is a whole city on fire, burning down the millionaires' and the billionaires' houses and the poor parts of town, and spreading out of control. And this, I think, is our reality right now. The physical shocks that we're experiencing all over the world at a more extensive rate and a greater intensity are not going to spare any part of the world. We're all really deeply in the destabilization together. Of course, the rich have more buffers. Even if their house burns down, they have a bank account or an insurance policy to rebuild. But the truth is, we're entering a period of massive geophysical destabilization. I had the good fortune to lead a team of climate scientists for 15 years at Columbia University in what we call the Earth Institute. And so I got a big dose of climatology over the 15 years. And I think I've mentioned here that I had an extremely annoying, even terrifying colleague, the most brilliant, soft-spoken, wonderful climatologist that I know, Professor James Hansen, who just scared the wits out of me for 15 years because he would always come up to me in a U.S. Midwestern twang and very gently say, Jeff, it's worse than we thought. He has been telling me ahead of time by about a 5-year lead time, sometimes a 10-year lead time, that we would reach the 1.5 degrees about now, that the pace of warming was much faster even than the IPCC has been telling us, that the dangers are much greater. He being at the cutting edge of research, whereas the IPCC is at the consensus of research, gave him a different perspective. And whenever the IPCC came out with a dramatic report, he would shake his head and say, Jeff, this is out of date. They don't understand. And one of the main points that he was making to me for the past decade is that the underlying rate of warming has probably doubled from the rate that it was between 1970 and 2000 to the rate that it is now. And it's a big mystery exactly why, but his main conclusion is that the scientists and the models had underestimated what's called the physical sensitivity of the planet to greenhouse gases, because pollution was partly masking the effect of the greenhouse gases on the warming. And now that some of that pollution, especially the sulfate aerosols, are being removed by pollution control, that is unmasking a faster rate of warming that's taking place and that has been taking place and that he surmised already 20 years ago. So we're already probably in an era where the underlying rate of warming is between 0.3 and 0.4 degrees Celsius per decade. Now imagine that our underlying trend was about 1.25 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, but the warming is 0.3 degrees per decade. So he already told me about 8 years ago, forget 1.5 degrees. It's impossible. We're going to shoot right past it. And officially, and at the UN, we were all saying, fight harder, move faster, stay below the limits. But Hansen was already shaking his head and telling me, Jeff, this is ridiculous. it's already lost, at least for decades to come. Maybe it can be rebent later in this century. And in 2024, we breached 1.5 degrees, partly because of the interannual El Nino or so-called ENSO effect, but not only. Also because the underlying trend is faster, and where we are is already higher than was surmised just a few years ago. We are going to be living in the 1.5 degrees C and above levels for decades to come. And one of the reasons why in Paris it was so emphasized, stay below 1.5 degrees, is that scientists, including another one of my colleagues at the Earth Institute, a great scientist, late scientist, Wally Broker, had already said 20 years ago, the Earth system is so unstable and nonlinear that if you reach certain thresholds, things can run out of control through feedback effects. One of the feedback effects that seems to be happening right now is that the warmer temperatures are speeding the bacterial activity in the wetlands, and so the natural release of methane is being accelerated. This is a natural feedback effect, which is amplifying the warming, and we'll get other natural effects. Broker hypothesized 25 years ago that the thermohaline circulation, the ocean circulation, which he actually discovered scientifically about 40 years ago, could slow down or even stop because of the changes of the salinity of the water in the North Atlantic as the ice melts in the Arctic, slowing down that circulation and creating havoc potentially for the European climate, which is a part on the receiving end of the thermohaline circulation. So we are in a profoundly unstable era. And we have an incoming government whose policy is to deny this, just to mention. The favorite slogan of President Trump is drill, baby, drill. He won votes on this. He literally does not have the insight or the imagination that certain things you just want to keep under the ground. When you have wealth in oil and gas, it seems completely self-evident to him that you drill it. Why not? It's money, it's wealth. He told one of his appointees, you stay away from the liquid gold under the ground, that's mine. He has his eye on Canada's oil and gas. He has his eye on Greenland's oil and gas and other resources. To him, it's second nature. If it's money, you take it. Why not? And there are many leaders around the world that have that basic attitude. And so the first point of destabilization is we have entered the age of geophysical destabilization, but we have not yet entered the era of political solutions to this. We have one major rogue government coming in, that's the US, probably will be pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, maybe not, but most likely yes. And this is our first adventure. Second, of course, we are in an equally shocking, amazing, potentially positive and potentially disastrous age of technological advance as well. I don't think almost any of us can fully fathom, maybe even I'll add Elon to the list, what the AI revolution is going to entail. But it's absolutely dramatic, without any doubt. And its effects on the world economy are already plain to see everywhere, but its meaning is only at the very beginning. It will change everything in economics, in wealth and income distribution, in jobs, in geopolitics, in how wars are fought. And we are clearly in a phase that is extraordinary of technological advance, but how many people know and understand what's really happening? I would say only a handful in the militaries, perhaps in the intelligence agencies, in a few companies, and the rest of us are watching, stunned in amazement. But this will reshape all of our economies and no doubt reshape our lives. A third obvious and massive disruption, and in 7 days we will learn a lot more about how this will evolve, is the change of geopolitics, because we already entered a new historic phase. I would say a historic phase that is on a cycle, as I've discussed at this podium, a cycle of a 500-year cycle, actually, that's underway. The dominance of the Western world has ended geopolitically. The rise of Asia is one of the most profound events of human history. Europe went into ascendance starting around 500 years ago. China made what I call the worst economic policy decision in history in 1434, which was to say, we're not interested in our fleet or in the oceans anymore, we'll stay home. And Europe filled the gap with Vasco da Gama and with Columbus and with Magellan and with the voyages of conquest that followed in the 16th century. And one could say the rest is history, but we had a 500-year ascendance of the West. And within that ascendance of the West, we had a 200-year ascendance of the Anglo-Saxon world. Britain, by virtue of its technological excellence, James Watt, above all others, became the first industrial power in the world, the first mega power in the world, starting around 1815 at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And the British Empire became the hegemon for the world for the next century. The United States, after World War II, learning on the knee, I should say, of the British Empire, because everything the United States knows about empire it learned from the Brits, and the US took over. And in 1991, when the Soviet Union ended, the United States said, we've made it. We're not just the first, second, third, or fourth Rome. We're bigger than all of them ever in history. We are the new unipolar power. We are untouchable and dominant in the world. Of course, hubris is an amazing phenomenon. That hubris lasted about 10 years and started to be contradicted by the facts already at the beginning of the 21st century with America's disastrous wars of choice. And for the last 20 years, the United States has been pursuing unipolarity against greater and greater obstacles known as reality. So 2025 is a very notable year. The Biden administration absolutely believed in the unipolar US world, coming into office determined to lead the world, leaving office understanding that all that has happened is that the world has become more dangerous. Wars have erupted everywhere. The US has not gotten its way anywhere and will not, because the whole idea of one country dominating the rest of the world is a delusion and an anachronism. But what it means is we are in a new geopolitics that is profound. It's the end of the Western domination. It is the end of the US hegemony. And what will come next? Will it be war? Will it be US-China confrontation? Will it be multipolarity under international rules? Will it be regional hegemons guarding their own neighborhoods and leaving each other alone? Will the United States go to war with Canada instead of China? Well, it almost seems like that's the current plan. But the fact of the matter is we're in for something new, and it's quite unstable and very dangerous. On the positive side, I am looking forward to next week for one reason. I regard the Biden administration as just about the worst we've had in foreign policy for a long time, because it acted on a delusional basis that it refused to recognize multipolarity. Maybe Donald Trump will do something more realistic. The last point that I would say, and then I want to turn to ASEAN particularly, is we are in a world where regional integration counts more than ever. And that is, to a very large extent, a technological reality. No individual country in the world can go it alone in this world of environmental change, energy system transformation, artificial intelligence, supply chains, vital resources. And no country can prosper if it is at odds with its neighbors. This, I would say, is a basic principle that I would insist for our reality in the 21st century. You cannot be an island isolated, perhaps linked to a great power around the world, halfway around the world, and expect to thrive if you're not well cooperative and coordinating with your own neighbors. And there are some very basic reasons for that. The scale of cutting-edge technology, the scale of the infrastructure transformation that we need, the scale of AI resources needed for implementing the new cutting-edge technologies mean that even a China or the United States or India doesn't have a chance unless it's working with other countries, and especially with its neighboring countries. This is why China's Belt and Road Initiative, for example, is so fundamentally right. Make physical connections. Have rail, fiber, power, water management, watershed management, ecosystem management that works for a region, for a neighborhood, because there's no other way to make the changes that are absolutely essential. Malaysia cannot have a zero carbon energy system on its own if it's not interconnected across ASEAN. And that's true for every one of the ASEAN countries for the same reason. Yes, there may be some intermittent energy sources that you can tap, but the cost of trying to run a decarbonized energy system under one's own resources are absolutely prohibitive, because the zero carbon energy sources are intermittent, they are geographically highly differentiated, there are strong gradients of where power generation should be applied. Hydropower comes only in certain places. Ocean power is only best in certain places. Land for solar power or for wind power or for geothermal power is geographically determined. You have to connect those to the population centers and interconnect the population centers to be able to have the kind of energy system we need in order to confront the climate crisis. And that's just one example of the many, many examples that show there is no way to survive, much less to thrive, in this destabilized era, except at scale. And so ASEAN was a nice and convenient idea in the past. Now it is the essential idea. And ASEAN itself is essential not only for the 10 members of ASEAN, but also as part of even larger groupings, such as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the 15 countries that also include Northeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and Australia and New Zealand. So I would argue that regional integration is now a strategic necessity for any place in the world. And it's probably in this reason, though put a little bit more crudely than I would like, that Donald Trump suddenly is interested in Canada, or interested in Panama, or interested in Greenland. Yes, they're part of our region. They're actually important for the United States. Donald Trump's approach is, if you want to discuss with somebody, you punch them in the face first and get their attention. This is not exactly how I would start a discussion with the neighborhood, but the idea of suddenly the president putting a focus on Canada, well, this is something different from what we've had. It's much more important for the United States to focus on Canada than it is, quite frankly, to focus on Taiwan, or to focus on the South China Sea, or to focus on Ukraine. To focus on one's own neighborhood makes sense. To focus halfway around the world because you think you're playing the game of Risk or trying to be the global hegemon, that's a little bit delusional and a little bit of a luxury that no country can afford. When you think about regional integration or supranational integration, then you suddenly realize that Malaysia is part of many different groupings, and that also is extremely important, a kind of variable architecture. ASEAN is crucial. RCEP is crucial. The BRICS, extremely important for other reasons, but the BRICS bring together now about 40+% of the world output. Many of them face, or have faced during the Biden period at least, geopolitical opposition and unilateral sanctions by the United States. And so the need to create an alternative to the US dollar settlements in order to be able to do one's business without the United States telling who your partner is and who your partner cannot be is what the BRICS is really all about in its high priority. And Malaysia is absolutely right to seek to join, as Indonesia has this year, and as Thailand also has joined as a BRICS partner. The OIC is extraordinarily important, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, 57 countries at a time when the Middle East is one of the world's flashpoints and potential points, obviously, of a horrific descent into general war, even nuclear war. So this kind of variable geography of supranational integration is extraordinarily important. The world's too complicated to go it alone. The technologies are at too big a scale. The costs, the finance, and the physical contiguity all mean cooperate with your neighbors. Interestingly, by the way, US foreign policy has been directed for decades at dividing neighbors. This is an ancient imperial formula, divide and conquer, and the United States goes out of its way to tell Japan and Korea, don't cooperate with China, they're very dangerous, we'll protect you. This is self-serving advice. If Japan and Korea have any sense, the first thing they'll do is cooperate with their neighbor, because if the three ever got together in a close and peaceful way, it would be the most dynamic, high-income corner of the whole world economy, and I say a benefit for everybody else. So what does all of this mean in terms of the content of ASEAN priorities and ASEAN regional integration? I know that there are many plans in the works, and we're going to hear from Secretary General Dr. Kao Kim Hearn about this, but let me mention things that I think are extremely important. First is an energy plan for all of ASEAN. Every part of the world needs to decarbonize the energy system to face a growing climate calamity. It cannot be done except on a regional scale. probably the right scale is even beyond ASEAN. It would connect with China, it would connect with Northeast Asia, it would connect with Australia and New Zealand, because the idea of a submarine cable that connects Australia's desert solar power with Indonesia is probably a bankable and, from an engineering point of view, a bold but feasible program. So one can imagine an energy grid that extends from Australia to ASEAN, to China, Korea, and Japan, and maybe even into Northeast Russia, Mongolia, and other countries of East Asia. This is extremely important. This requires an engineering vision, a technical vision, a political vision, an economic plan, a regional power market, so that there is a power pool in which energy is traded across this vast space, and a financing strategy as well. So energy transformation, I would put as a very high priority. A land use policy for ASEAN is also extraordinarily important. This region, like every region, is losing its ecosystems. It is in state of very advanced degradation of biodiversity across all of the ecosystems of this region. The coastlines, the marine environment, the wetlands, and of course the forests. And there is no plan at this point that is adequate to this. And I've observed in visits here for 40 years that it is, from an economic calculus, absolutely profitable to cut down every tree and replant them as palm oil across this region. It would be, of course, a devastation. But it is profitable in the short term, devastating in the long term. And so a regional strategy for protecting the ecosystems of this region, which are shared, which cut across countries, because ecosystems do not respect national boundaries. Riversheds do not respect national boundaries. They're all multinational. This is a second area that's absolutely essential. A third and related area is resilience to climate change, because this is, of course, a part of the world that will be extraordinarily heavily impacted by rising sea levels and by other manifestations of long-term climate change. And the kind of disasters that we're seeing around the world this past year will visit this region. And this region needs a regional strategy for its climate resilience, emergency response, financing, insurance, where to build and how to build. And this, I think, is something that should be undertaken at the ASEAN scale. Fourth is the connected infrastructure. And there are three that are most essential: the transport infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, and the power grid. And that, all of them, have a huge benefit if there is an ASEAN-wide strategy. And I know that such strategies are taking shape, and I think the Belt and Road Initiative is the best friend of this kind of strategy, because China is the low-cost supplier of the advanced technologies for regional integration on transport, on digital, and on power. And so with China in the neighborhood and with its own reasons for fostering this kind of integration, this is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity for ASEAN. I would say that another ASEAN-wide policy should be to capitalize on the new AI revolution, because this will transform all of our economic sectors, the industrial sector, the logistics, of which this region plays a huge role. Once again, China and the US are the two leaders by far of the AI revolution, but ASEAN is absolutely with an economic future that will depend on being part of the AI revolution. This requires a massive increase of skilling education, at Sunway and others, of course, of research and development initiatives across the region, of best practice centers and R&D centers being implemented across the region. Another area of potential integration is finance, and that is the question of ASEAN developing new financial institutions for financing all of these transformations. Maybe an ASEAN development bank that can scale up the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of financing for ASEAN. One of the things that I've noticed is that regions that put together development bank finance get a big advantage out of it. There's a big advantage of multilateral finance over national financing. You get lower rates by pooling the risks. And while Asia has several institutions, of course, the Asian Development Bank, the AIIB, and the New Development Bank, maybe ASEAN should explore its own development bank for part of these financing challenges. And then the last area that I would mention is diplomacy, because ASEAN needs to be the diplomatic unity of the 10 countries. Don't get pulled apart by the great powers. Don't let the great powers pull off one or two and divide you. This is what great powers do. But what ASEAN needs is unity so that it can negotiate with the US and say, thank you very much, we want to do business with you, but we're not enemies. We're our biggest neighbor, but we also want to do business with the United States and Europe. So don't pull us apart from that. And with the European Union, which is very important for ASEAN products, and where I believe the European Green Deal and the ASEAN Green Deal need to be seen as high-level strategic partners, and that the relationship between Europe and ASEAN should be at that very high, positive, strategic level. I'd also like to see this region play a major diplomatic role in solving some of the terrible crises in other parts of the world, notably in the Middle East, because the voice of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, the voice of leaders in this region in calling for a state of Palestine, in calling for justice for the Palestinian people, in calling for peace based on the two-state solution, is extremely important and powerful. In June, there will be a UN conference on peace in the Middle East. It's the opportunity to end what has been 80 years of war by establishing a state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel, according to the two-state solution. And I think that this region can play an absolutely enormous role. So let me conclude by saying there's a big agenda ahead. The big agenda is not because we all like so much homework. The big agenda is because reality has put a lot on our plate. The world is changing so fast and so dramatically. We will have to run to not only keep up, but to get ahead of these changes so that they serve the human purpose. And I am very much convinced that this region will do exactly that, because you are living in an exciting and peaceful and very dynamic part of the world that can help to solve global problems. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Cheah, for the eye-opening presentation. We will have a Q&A session for the first three person that will ask questions. Perhaps if any one of the audience would like to ask question, you can raise your hands. Please introduce your name and your institution.
Don't be shy, because I'll have to call on you otherwise. So.
There, oh yeah, one gentleman in the back. There will be a volunteer with a mic. And also in the front. Okay. And one more. Okay, gentleman in the back. Yes. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Please.
My name is Danish from Sunway University.
Wave. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Danish from Sunway University. I have one brief question. Do you believe that we need to talk about economic system change? Because so far, what I have been listening is we need partnerships, we need financing, we need cooperation. But I think we need to address the uncomfortable question that hinders sustainable development, that is the economic system.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question, lady in the front.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that very insightful presentation. I'm Rebecca, I'm with the Sunway Group, I'm an independent director with Sunway Group. I like what you said about ASEAN, and I think ASEAN is punching below its weight, and there's so much more ASEAN can do. And ASEAN, member states are free to engage in bilateral relations or multilateral relations as they see fit. But I think ASEAN has agency and convening power through the East Asia Summit, which it tends to not do use enough of. And that, I think, has more power and convening ability than even BRICS, if used appropriately. And that's what I mean when I say ASEAN is punching below its weight. Using the EAS in its fullest form would really, put ASEAN on the global stage, and address some of the issues that you talk about, whether it's geopolitics or economics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Get the last question from gentleman in the middle.
Good morning, Prof.
Good morning.
I would like to know whether is there a substantial change in the environment policy or ESG with the change of Trump and Biden, and the impact will be what will be the other developing countries do. Do we follow US policy?
Yep.
Or do we should have our own? Thank you.
Excuse me, sir. Name and institution, please.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Zul. I'm from University Islam Malaysia.
Thank you. Professor Shah, please.
Great. So let me take each of these in turn. On economic systems change, the idea that we are pursuing in the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and at the UN is that sustainable development is a system when viewed in an appropriate way. What does it mean? Sustainable development means an economic and social system that explicitly and simultaneously addresses 4 objectives: economic development, social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and peaceful cooperation. This is different from normal economic development because in normal economic development, the focus is on raising GDP or GDP per capita. But the idea of sustainable development is explicitly 4 cornerstone objectives: economic, social, environmental, and geopolitical. What does that mean in terms of systems? It definitely means a different kind of governance. It's not any kind of simple system. Of course, there is no simple economic system to begin with other than in the first page of an economics textbook, which says market economy or something like that. But these are, in any event, slogans rather than realities of what are very complex institutions that we live with. But the institutions that we have are not adequate to sustainable development. We know, obviously, that the economic institutions that we have were designed without protecting the physical environment in mind. And there's nothing automatic in economic systems that protect the environment. And especially when one places reliance on market signals, price signals, profitability, market capitalization, you're quite far from a system that protects the environment, because the prices for environmental services are not there unless they're constructed to be there in what are called corrective prices or carbon taxes or Pigouvian taxation in the formal jargon that we use in economics. So when you start with the idea that sustainable development is your goal, you're led to many, many different kinds of institutional designs that we don't have right now. One is a basic one. You need to be able to plan about 20 years ahead. How many countries have long-term planning? Very, very few. The United States has no planning, by the way. We have no planning ministry. We have no development ministry. We have no economics ministry. We have something like a finance ministry, which is our treasury. The only place that planning gets done is in the Pentagon. And there is a lot of planning. There is a lot of forward-looking planning about technology. Why does the United States not have 1 kilometer of fast rail, whereas China has 50,000 kilometers? Because the Pentagon doesn't care about fast rail. And it's the only place that we actually have planning in the United States. But we need planning that is something different. You need to be able to plan a power system. Not to leave it to a utility, but to plan a power system. Of course, that's a feasible engineering task, but it needs to be understood to be a political economic task. And then one has to ask, what are all the components of that? And how is it going to be financed? And institutionally, how is it going to be governed? And so on. So I would say we're making a new economic system. And to my mind, the economic system is the one that can implement sustainable development. It involves planning, it involves regional coordination, it involves blended finance of public and private institutions, it involves specific goals like the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. None of those are in a standard economics text, because standard economics texts aren't addressed to sustainable development. They're addressed to a much narrower range of problems, maybe macroeconomic stabilization or equilibrium of a market economy, but not to economic, social, environmental, and geopolitical aims. So my basic point is, do we need a new economic system? Of course we do, but not to be designed out of theory, but to be designed out of problem solving. The problem solving is, where are we trying to be in the year 2045 or the year 2050? What are we going to need to actually get us there? Stating a vision doesn't get us there, although it's pretty useful to know at least where we want to go. But what institutions can get us there? Market, non-market, public sector, blended, and so forth. So that would be my shorthand answer. In terms of what ASEAN can do, I agree with you. What more the East Asia Summit can do, I'd love to learn. In general, this is a region of 700 million people, very dynamic, extremely important for the world economy, of very high political salience. And so integration from the diplomatic point of view is also so absolutely essential. What will Trump mean for the environment? Look, basically two things. One, a complete mess. There won't be a coherent idea for 4 years in Washington, okay? So don't hold your breath for a coherent idea from Washington. My advice all the time on that is remember the United States is one of 193 countries. It happens to have 4.1% of the world population. It's not insignificant, but it doesn't determine the future of the world. This will be 4 years where we will not have global environmental agreements, okay? We won't. On the other hand, even within the United States, there will be tremendous progress on decarbonization alongside a lot of drilling as well. But the decarbonization will come because first, it's a grid parity or better across many regions of the US. So we have the oil state of our country, Texas, as a leader of dramatically rapid rollout of renewable energy, for example, because it's profitable, because there's a lot of high quality renewable energy. That's true of the Dakotas, which is the fracking region of the United States, and so on. So there will be continued investment at the state and local and corporate level during the Trump period. There will be confusion and lawsuits and statements that you won't quite believe and so forth. Don't let it get to you. For the rest of the world, the main point is no matter what any politician says, listen to James Hansen instead. He knows a lot more. He's a lot smarter. He's been at this a lot longer. He will tell you the direction of change of the physical environment. He will explain to you what needs to be done. He will do it better than the IPCC because he will not be the consensus. He'll just be at the cutting edge. And I'm using him figuratively. In other words, let's listen to the evidence. The world will move to a decarbonized energy system. I guarantee it. It will move late. It will move with so many twists and turns and stupidities, but it will move there because what's happening to Los Angeles is going to happen everywhere. And people are going to say, we actually don't want our houses to burn down. We like water because we need to stay alive. We like food. We don't want to see our neighborhoods go underwater. Manhattan, where I live, is a small island economy, the bottom half of which will be submerged if the worst case scenarios, which are quite possible, evolve in terms of the breakup of the West Antarctic ice sheet. We will change our energy systems. Don't delay. This is what, by the way, China went ahead in 2014 and said, we're going to electric vehicles. All those clever people at Volkswagen, Daimler-Benz, Mercedes, and others said, oh, I'm not so sure. Now China dominates the world of electric vehicles by far. And the rest are scrambling, and they're putting on tariffs and all the rest because China looked at the evidence and invested in it. And the rest of the world delayed. So my advice is don't delay because it's really going to happen. Donald Trump cannot stop the tides. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs, for the answers. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. I want to close with the highlight from the presentation. Regional integration is now a strategic necessity, and ASEAN is the essential idea. I hope this session can set as a foundation for a fruitful discussion for the next 2 days. Thank you for our wonderful speakers and audience. Please give a round of applause for all of us.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, and thank you so much, Avia. Food for thought, and now food for the tummy. We're going to take a short break before we reconvene for the opening ceremony with our distinguished